Earlier this year, the public learned that former City Attorney Chuck Watts was engaged in work for an outside client while employed by the city. City leaders were unaware of the extent of the outside work, with Mayor Nancy Vaughan saying in July, "We were under the impression that it was small, that it was not day-to-day. Our bad for not being more specific." What lessons do you think the city should take from this situation, and how would you ensure accountability and transparency in city government if elected?
So the city attorneys are the ones that drop the contracts for the city attorneys, the city manager, the attorneys in the office. So we need to be very, very careful, because it can just be one word in there where someone might take it, and I'm not saying that anyone has, but you got to be really careful on how things are stated in that contract. Because I also thought it was something very, very minor, and then we found out otherwise. So, it's just the fact that we not only need to be careful, we need to be transparent about it, but we are not allowed to discuss personnel matters in public. Unless the mayor and everyone else agrees and has sessions in open session, but we are not, by state statute, allowed to discuss in public personnel matters, and that is a personnel matter. But I can say that when we do contracts, those are public. And we just did one this week for our city manager. And once it goes on and is signed by all parties, it will be public and everyone can look at it. So it is a personnel matter when something goes wrong with an employee, one of the two we hire, or any other employee in the city, for instance, because we are asked quite often, what happened to this employee or that appointee? So we do need to be accountable for what we can state, and we can be transparent without breaking the law. We cannot break the law.
Mr. Perkins, and I'll repeat the question. Earlier this year, the public learned that former City Attorney Chuck Watts was engaged in work for an outside client while employed by the city. City leaders were unaware of the extent of this outside work, with Mayor Nancy Vaughan saying in July, "We were under the impression that it was small, that it was not day-to-day. Our bad for not being more specific." What lessons do you think the city should take from this situation, and how would you ensure accountability and transparency in city government if elected?
Well, you only got 2 employees, so you've only got 2 employment contracts. So the first question, when I get to be mayor, that I will ask one of our 2 employees, who happens to be the city attorney, is who drafted the contract that you signed? And the reason that I would ask that question is I don't believe that someone's employee that works under that city attorney ought to be drafting a contract for that person. That's a conflict of interest. That puts that person in a bad position, because that person is going to have influence over who drafted that contract. So I would want that contract to be reviewed by a third party outside counsel and approved, so that we would not have any inkling that somebody drafted something. I would also want the entire city council to be briefed by that outside counsel as to the implications of the contract that we signed. Now, that's not really too much to ask when you're a 9-person board and you've got 2 employees. We ought to know what is in those contracts dead cold. And then we ought to be supervising those 2 employees on a quarterly basis to make sure that their goals are in line with the collective goals of the city council. And I don't think that's been done effectively in the past, and that doesn't give me a good feeling about public trust. The public demands accountability, and we're going to give it to them.